Wealth, yoga, wine. Welcome to my podcast. I'm Valerie Hale. Optimism, hard optimism, is not the old-fashioned positive thinking, Price Pritchett tells us. Hard optimism is actually non-negative thinking. Research shows that repetitive positive thinking is not what gets us through tragic events, nor is it what gets us through life's ups and downs. It's the ability to stop the doubt, the fear, and the worry, the non-negative thinking that gets us through our ups and downs in life. The reality is how we negotiate negativity in our lives. He also says that optimism and pessimism are not yin and yang. They don't belong together. You can't say to yourself, well, I'm going to be pessimistic for a while because I've been optimistic for a while. You really want to get rid of pessimism. For example, Price Pritchett points out to us that optimism shines light into dark, which pessimism creates. Pessimism creates the ability to not focus on what needs to be done in our lives. Pessimism causes us to focus on obstacles rather than solutions. Pessimism weakens our confidence. Pessimism stops our ability to see opportunities. It makes others miserable, including ourselves. He shares with us 14 steps to avert negativity in our lives, to stop and avoid the negative fear and doubts and worry. I'm sharing 3 of them that you can start immediately. 2 of them are being grateful and being forgiving. Grateful is very easy to start and it's very powerful. I suggest every morning or sometime during the day, write 5 things, and it's important to write them. Write 5 things for which you're grateful. And it can be basic everyday living. It's grateful for what you already have in life. For instance, I live in Gulfport, Florida. It's 75 and beautiful here, no humidity. If you live in my former state of New York, it's beautiful fall weather up there. These are things to be grateful for. You simply write, I'm so happy and grateful for beautiful weather. You can be happy and grateful for your family, for your kids, for your spouse. You can be happy and grateful that you made it through the pandemic. We're still in one, but that you haven't caught COVID. So start being grateful. It brings riches into your lives. You've heard this before from Mary Morrissey, Bob Proctor. Price Pritchett is this corporate guru of mergers and acquisitions, and he's a big believer in these processes. The next one, forgiveness, is very difficult for people, and it was difficult for me, but I practice it also. And the whole concept is practicing to forgive. All of us have felt betrayed by someone, by an event. Even in the corporate environment, you may have an employee, a staff member who maybe they're stealing from the company or they're backstabbing employees. They have unskilled behavior, and it's behavior that's important to forgive. The person can very well be toxic, and you never want to see them again. But let go of that grudge. Letting go is very powerful. Many people think that forgiveness is a weakness. They are so wrong. Forgiving takes inner strength, and it takes courage. It also opens your heart, which technically allows so much more positive things to happen. Your heart and your brain, your thinking process are very much connected. Once you learn to forgive, and it's a process, it doesn't happen immediately, really amazing things will happen in your life. It also displaces pessimism. He also talks about the 3rd step is to hone your inner strengths, your innate abilities, your innate talents. Now, how do you discover that if you don't know? Because a lot of our innate strengths and talents have been tapped down because of school or perhaps our parents. I watch, where I live, there's a rec center nearby and I see a father teaching his son, young son, probably 6 or 7, teaching him how to catch and hit a baseball. And this young man is really good. The father is really who entices me because he is honing his skill of not only teaching his son probably to become a professional baseball player, because this dad's rather proficient himself, but he's also honing his skill of communicating to his son. Or another example is perhaps you're a latent musician and that innate ability has been tapped down for, you have to work 60, 70 hours a week. Grab that instrument, practice 5 days a week, 5 minutes a day, and you're going to find yourself really happy, really expansive. When you bring that kind of joy into your life, it's so much easier to put up with the other aspects which are negative in our lives. Lastly, Price Pritchett says, non-negative thinking is the essence of hard optimism. So remember, just don't repeat positive aspirations to yourself. When the fear, doubt, and worry show up, switch that baby off and get some ideas going. Believe it or not, there's always some good, and a bad situation is temporary. If you've ever sailed through a storm, it's heart-rending, it's heart-stopping, but we get through it. Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini Yoga is famous for its breathing techniques. And I have talked about this, of course, in other podcasts. Right now, breathing is really important when we deal with a pandemic. You don't want to be breathing in other people's space, however. The first one that I think is really important is the left nostril. You are going to hold either your pointer finger or your thumb against your right nostril and breathe slowly and deeply. When I say deeply, you breathe all the way down to your belly. And that's another thing. We really don't breathe properly. So hold your right nostril, breathe in and out of your left nostril. If you're finding yourself waking up at 3 a.m. and you really do need to go back to sleep, try this. Either lie on your back or lie on your left side so that your left nostril is open and you can press on your right nostril. The other one that I think is really good for children is the anger breath. Instead of a timeout, have them sit in a chair, and all of us adults can do this too. You're going to put your hands and fists, they're going to go backwards over your head. And they're going to go pretty fast. And you're going to breathe in and out in a circle position of your mouth, like you're blowing out a candle. It sounds like this. And it's a breath that goes all the way down to your belly. This is called the anger breath because it brings more oxygen to your mind. It slows down the fear, doubt, and worry, and just temper tantrums. The last breath is the breath of fire. This is actually probably one of the most difficult and technical breaths for Kundalini Yoga because a lot of people, again, don't breathe all the way down to their belly. Breath of fire is antivirus, anti-illness. It's also one of the most common breaths that we use in most of our Kundalini Yoga positions. It's going to be again all the way to your belly, and you're breathing in and out simply through your nose, but it's fast. It's almost as though you're blowing your nose, but you're not. And it sounds like this, but it's only through your nose, whereas the anger breath was through your mouth, an opened O mouth. This is through your nose only. So it's just as though you were blowing your nose, but very quickly, and the breath has to come from your diaphragm. The Kundalini Yoga is the world's oldest yoga. I have been practicing it, only Kundalini Yoga. I'm a yoga snob for, 26 years, which is why it's on the podcast. I have links on my podcast details for you to follow more virtual classes of my favorite Kundalini Yoga teachers. Wine. Instead of wine, I wanted to talk about hard cider. I talked about it last week, and the links to certain hard cider distilleries in New York, because that is the best place for hard cider production. I wanted to explain how hard cider is made. Angry Orchard is my favorite. And watching the video, which is included, again, on the podcast details, watching Angry Orchard, watch the distiller make the hard cider is just like a winemaker. Of course, you pick the apples, and he even mentions that the longer you leave some of the apples on, the higher content of sugar and the higher content of alcohol. That's similar to leaving grapes on the wine. They hand pick the apples. That's labor intensive. They're all put into the sorting belt, and they go through this by hand. They're washed once just to get all the grit off of them. While they're hand picking, they go through a bath after they've hand picked everything. Then they do another bath that's more concentrated, and they actually soak the apples. This is Angry Orchard. I don't know about the other guys. Once they have finished the soaking bath, then they're going to get pressed. It is pressed by a machine. Once it is pressed by a machine, it's going to be fermented. They do add some yeast, but Angry Orchard, their first pressing, they actually use natural yeast. And many of us don't understand what natural yeast is. Natural yeast is something that's already in our environment. It's in the air. It sticks to the plants. It sticks to the leaves. Therefore, his natural yeast production is really clean and really crisp. It adds a whole nother level of complexity. Once it has become juice, he actually puts it in neutral oak barrels. Neutral oak barrels impart absolutely no flavor, but it's a good place for the hard apple cider to simply rest and become a beautiful product. I strongly suggest, if you have not tried hard apple cider, it is a wonderful drink, especially for these fall weather in Florida, because it doesn't really ever get cold here. It's very refreshing. If you're not a beer drinker, this is a great thing to do. It is low in alcohol. Hard cider, you're going to see the link on my podcast, so I would certainly watch that and go to the previous podcast, and it has lots of information about New York distilleries. In conclusion, hard optimism is not the old-fashioned positive thinking. Simple positive thinking is not going to help you get through the day, because we still have fear, doubt, and worry, which creeps in. And when that happens, you want to take over with thoughts that are going to provide solutions for you, thoughts that are going to remind you that it's temporary, thoughts such as, I can get through this. I am bigger than any challenge that comes my way. That's Mary Morrissey. Kundalini Yoga, we really need to focus on the art of breathing and breathing correctly. This is something you can teach your young kids. The pandemic is really a hard time for them. This anger breath would be much better than a timeout in the corner. And lastly, New York distilleries. Oh my gosh, there's hundreds of them, but on the previous podcast, I think I listed about the top 10 distilleries. And to wrap this up, I am not a life coach. I'm not a consultant. I create this podcast on a weekly basis in order to help hundreds of people over the world to enhance their lives in less than 10 minutes. I am an affiliate, and in every podcast detail, I put some kind of link to a masterclass, and either Matt Boggs or Mary Morrissey would love for you to sign up for a multi-week course. I would too, because, gosh, that's how I earn my mortgage money. Merci.